My name is Jessica, I'm 29 years old, and last night my parents destroyed what was supposed to be my celebration dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. I watched in horror as my mother threw a glass of wine directly in my face while my father swept all the plates off our table, sending them crashing to the floor. But that wasn't even the worst part. Through the wine dripping down my face, I saw them pull out a thick envelope and slam it on the table. It was a lawsuit. For $500,000. But to understand how my own parents became my worst enemies, I need to go back 6 months. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's dealt with family betrayal? Hit that like button if you believe family should support each other, and don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to take some unbelievable turns that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. 6 months ago, I was living what most people would consider a successful life. As a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company in New York, I had worked my way up from an entry-level position through countless late nights and weekends. My apartment might have been small, but it was mine, earned through my own sweat and determination. My parents, William and Dorothy Thompson, were wealthy real estate developers who owned multiple properties across the East Coast. Growing up in their shadow meant constantly striving for their approval, which seemed perpetually out of reach. My younger brother Ryan, at 26, had always been their golden child despite dropping out of 3 different colleges and burning through trust fund money on failed business ventures and parties. While I graduated summa cum laude and built my career from scratch, Ryan could do no wrong in their eyes. Every family gathering involved listening to excuses for his latest failure while my achievements were met with lukewarm acknowledgement at best. I had accepted this dynamic long ago, finding validation in my work and the life I built independently. Everything changed when grandmother Catherine passed away. She had been the one person in our family who truly saw me, who celebrated my accomplishments and understood my struggles. Her death hit me hard, but I found it strange when my parents handled all the funeral arrangements without including me in any decisions. They claimed it was to spare me the stress during a busy quarter at work, but something felt off about how quickly they wrapped up her estate matters. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a voicemail from someone named Harrison, identifying himself as my grandmother's attorney. He said he had been trying to reach me urgently about her will but kept getting blocked by my parents' legal team. When I finally met him at a small coffee shop downtown, what he revealed shook me to my core. My grandmother had left very specific instructions in her will. The bulk of her $15 million estate, including multiple properties and investment accounts, was to be divided with 60% going to me, 20% to my parents, and 20% to Ryan. My parents had been hiding the real will from me. They had conducted a private reading without informing me, claiming to other family members that grandmother's mental state had deteriorated and that she had changed her will last minute to leave everything to them as the responsible parties. Harrison had been fighting to reach me for weeks, but my parents' lawyers had thrown up every legal roadblock imaginable. He showed me the original documents, dated 2 years prior, with multiple witnesses including her doctor confirming she was of sound mind. The betrayal cut deep, but I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. When I confronted my parents at their Manhattan penthouse, they shifted seamlessly into damage control mode. My mother Dorothy, with her perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit, put on an Oscar-worthy performance about how they were just protecting me from the stress of managing such a large estate. My father William, still commanding in his 70s, spoke about family unity and how they were simply ensuring everything was handled properly during probate. They presented me with what they called temporary management papers, claiming it was standard procedure to have a unified front during estate settlement. They needed my signature to handle some immediate property tax issues and maintenance concerns. Trusting them despite my growing unease, I signed the documents without my own lawyer present. My mother even teared up, saying how proud she was that I was being so mature about helping the family through this difficult time. I would later discover those papers actually transferred my inheritance rights to a family trust they controlled exclusively. The manipulation was so smooth, so calculated, that I didn't realize I had just signed away my grandmother's entire legacy to me. They had weaponized my trust and desire for family harmony against me. As I left their penthouse that evening, my mother hugged me and whispered how grandmother would be so proud of me for putting family first. The irony of those words would haunt me in the months to come. 2 months after signing those papers, my parents approached me with what seemed like an olive branch. They invited me to their country club for lunch, where they presented an elaborate business proposal. They were developing a new luxury condominium complex in Brooklyn and needed someone with my marketing expertise to handle the branding and sales strategy. My father spoke passionately about building a family legacy, while my mother touched my hand and said this was their way of making sure I was included in the family business. The offer was enticing, 40% ownership of the development in exchange for my investment of $300,000 and my marketing leadership. They showed me architectural plans, market research, and projected returns that would triple my investment within 5 years. What really caught my attention was their promise to put my name on the building as a full partner, something they had never offered before. For the first time in my life, it seemed like they were recognizing my professional value. Ryan appeared at the meeting, looking healthier than I had seen him in years. His usual disheveled appearance was replaced with a crisp suit and clear eyes. He spoke about his recent stint in rehab, how he had finally gotten clean and wanted to make the family proud. He apologized for all the times he had disappointed us and asked for a chance to prove himself by working on this project together. The three of them painted a picture of family redemption and shared success that I desperately wanted to believe. Against my better judgment and the advice of my financial advisor, I liquidated my retirement accounts and investment portfolio to raise the money. The decision wasn't easy, but the opportunity to finally be seen as an equal in my family's business empire was too tempting to pass up. I even took a 6-month leave of absence from my job, telling my boss I needed to help with a family emergency. My parents assured me this was the best decision I would ever make. The red flags started appearing immediately. When I arrived at the office they had set up for the project, I discovered my name wasn't on any of the official paperwork as a partner, merely listed as a consultant. My parents explained it was a temporary measure for tax purposes and would be corrected once the initial funding was secured. Ryan, who was supposed to be working alongside me, showed up sporadically and seemed more interested in using the office as a place to meet his new girlfriend than actually contributing to the project. I threw myself into the work regardless, developing comprehensive marketing strategies, creating stunning visual presentations, and leveraging my industry connections to generate interest from potential buyers. My parents kept pushing back the timeline for formalizing my partnership, always with reasonable-sounding excuses about legal complications or waiting for the right moment with their investors. They would pat me on the head like a child and tell me to trust the process. 3 months into this arrangement, my professional life imploded. My employer received an anonymous complaint alleging that I had been using company resources and connections for personal gain, specifically citing conflicts of interest with my family's real estate development. The complaint included emails supposedly sent from my work account to our competitors, sharing proprietary information about marketing strategies. I was called into HR and suspended immediately pending a full investigation. The evidence was damning but completely fabricated. Someone had accessed my work laptop during one of my visits to the family office and sent those emails. The technical forensics would eventually prove the emails were sent while I was in documented meetings elsewhere, but the damage to my reputation was immediate and severe. When I confronted my parents about the suspicious timing, my mother's face showed just the slightest smirk before morphing into concern. They offered to have their lawyers help me, but I was beginning to see the trap they had constructed around me. My suspension became the talk of our industry. Headhunters who had been courting me for years stopped returning my calls. Professional connections distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone under investigation for corporate espionage. Ryan, when I confronted him about potentially accessing my laptop, played dumb and suggested maybe I had made enemies at work who were setting me up. The gaslighting was so blatant, yet I still had no concrete proof it was my family behind this coordinated attack on my career. Just when I felt most isolated, an unexpected lifeline appeared. My cousin Emma, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out through social media with a cryptic message about needing to talk urgently about family matters. Emma had distanced herself from the Thompson clan years ago after some vague falling out with my parents. At 35, she was a successful attorney in Boston, and her reaching out now seemed more than coincidental. We met at a discreet restaurant in Queens, far from any place my parents might frequent. Emma looked tired but determined as she laid out a folder of documents on the table. Her first words chilled me to the bone. She told me I wasn't the first family member my parents had done this to. 10 years ago, they had orchestrated a similar scheme with my Uncle Thomas, her father, who had built a successful tech company from scratch. The parallels were disturbing. They had convinced Thomas to bring them in as investors, promised him expansion capital, and slowly maneuvered him out of his own company through legal technicalities and fabricated crises. By the time he realized what was happening, they had used their legal team to force him out completely. He lost everything and now lived in a small apartment in New Jersey, cut off from the family after being painted as unstable and ungrateful. Emma had spent years collecting evidence of their past schemes, waiting for the right moment to act. She showed me documents dating back 20 years, revealing a pattern of my parents systematically targeting family members who had built something valuable on their own. There was Aunt Marie's restaurant chain, Cousin Robert's real estate portfolio, and even Great Uncle Bernard's shipping business. In each case, they used emotional manipulation, legal maneuvering, and when necessary, outright sabotage to steal what others had built. They kept just enough family members comfortable and dependent to maintain their image while destroying anyone who showed independence. Emma warned me that I was already deeper in their web than I realized. She had contacts in legal circles who told her my parents had been building a case against me for months, documenting every interaction to paint me as mentally unstable and vindictive. The temporary management papers I had signed gave them far more control than just managing estate taxes. They had effectively positioned themselves to claim I had attempted to steal from grandmother's estate if I ever challenged them. Armed with this new knowledge, I made the mistake of confronting my parents at a family dinner they had organized at their penthouse. I thought having other relatives present would protect me and force some accountability. The guest list included aunts, uncles, and cousins who had all benefited from my parents' generosity over the years. I should have realized they would never bite the hand that fed them. The dinner started with typical family pleasantries until I brought up my concerns about the business partnership and the strange coincidence of my work troubles. The room temperature seemed to drop as my father set down his wine glass with deliberate calm. What followed was a masterclass in gaslighting and manipulation. My mother began crying, asking why I was trying to hurt them when all they had ever done was love and support me. Ryan jumped in, claiming I was jealous of his recovery and new relationship with our parents. They painted me as paranoid, ungrateful, and possibly suffering from the stress of my job suspension. My father stood up and declared that if I continued with these hurtful accusations, he would have no choice but to protect the family's reputation through legal means. The other relatives watched in silence, some shaking their heads at my apparent cruelty to my generous parents. My Aunt Linda, who lived in an apartment my parents owned, suggested I should seek therapy for my obvious delusions. I left that dinner shaking with rage and frustration. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief at how thoroughly they had turned the entire family against me. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would find when I arrived at my apartment. The door was ajar, the lock clearly tampered with. Inside, my home had been ransacked with surgical precision. My laptop was gone, along with all the physical documents I had relating to grandmother's estate and the business partnership. Most heartbreaking was the theft of grandmother's jewelry box, which contained not just valuable pieces but letters she had written to me over the years. The building's security footage from that evening was mysteriously corrupted, showing nothing but static during the crucial hours. When the police arrived, they took my report but expressed skepticism when I suggested my family might be involved. Without evidence, they explained, there was nothing they could do about family members I had voluntarily given access to in the past. The violation of my personal space felt like another calculated move to destabilize me. The next morning, a process server knocked on my door with an eviction notice. My stomach dropped as I read the papers and realized my parents had quietly purchased my building through one of their shell companies 3 months earlier. They were terminating my lease for alleged lease violations, giving me 30 days to vacate. The walls were literally closing in around me, and I felt the full weight of their orchestrated campaign to destroy my life systematically. Desperation drives people to remember details they might otherwise overlook. 3 days after the break-in, while packing my belongings, I remembered something my grandmother had said during our last lunch together. She had mentioned keeping important things in more than one place because she never trusted anyone completely, not even family. She had winked at me and said her favorite hiding spot was where she first taught me about compound interest. That clue led me to a small credit union in Queens where grandmother had opened my first savings account when I was 10. The manager, who remembered both of us, confirmed there was indeed a safety deposit box in my name that grandmother had maintained for years. My hands trembled as I opened it, finding a treasure trove of documents that would change everything. There was a sealed envelope marked "For Jessica's eyes only, open only if they betray you." Inside was grandmother's real will, notarized and witnessed, along with a handwritten letter explaining her precautions. She had suspected my parents would try to steal my inheritance and had prepared accordingly. There were also USB drives containing recordings of conversations where my parents discussed their plans to eventually cut both Ryan and me out of everything once they had full control. Most shocking were bank statements showing systematic theft from grandmother's accounts while she was still alive, small enough amounts to avoid detection but adding up to millions over the years. The diary entries were perhaps the most painful to read. Grandmother documented how my parents had isolated her in her final years, limiting my visits by telling her I was too busy with work to care about her. They had been positioning themselves as her sole caregivers while actually neglecting her needs and siphoning her resources. She wrote about hoping I would forgive her for not being strong enough to fight them directly but trusting that I would be smart enough to uncover the truth. Among the evidence was documentation of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands where my parents had been moving money for years, not just from grandmother but from their various real estate ventures. There were clear patterns of tax evasion and money laundering that would interest federal investigators. Grandmother had hired a forensic accountant in secret who traced millions in hidden assets. She knew my parents were criminals but felt trapped by age and dependence. While processing this overwhelming information, I received a text from my best friend Monica asking to meet for coffee to check on me. I needed emotional support and agreed, despite Emma's warnings to trust no one. Monica had been my rock since college, the one person outside family I thought I could rely on completely. We met at our usual spot, and I noticed she seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone and avoiding eye contact. After 20 minutes of stilted conversation, Monica broke down and confessed. My parents had been paying her to report on me for the past 8 months. It started small, just updates on my mood and activities, but escalated to her providing them access to my apartment and personal information. They had threatened to destroy her career in fashion by using their connections if she didn't cooperate, but also offered her enough money to clear her student loans. She sobbed as she admitted to giving them my work laptop password and schedule. The betrayal from Monica hit differently than my family's deception. This was someone I had chosen to trust, who had held me through breakups and career disappointments. She tried to explain how trapped she felt, how my parents had presented it as helping me by keeping tabs on my mental health. I left the coffee shop without another word, adding her betrayal to the growing list of people who had sold me out for my parents' money and influence. 2 days later, another blast from the past appeared at my temporary hotel room. David, my ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago, showed up with flowers and apologies for how things had ended between us. His timing was so suspicious that I almost laughed at the transparency of it. He claimed to have been thinking about me and wanting to make amends, but within minutes was mentioning documents he needed me to sign for closure on some joint accounts we had never actually had. I played along just long enough to confirm my suspicions. David let slip that my mother had reached out to him through his employer, where she was a major client. They had offered him a promotion and bonus if he could get me to sign papers that would essentially declare me mentally incompetent and in need of financial guardianship. The documents were disguised as routine paperwork but would have given my parents complete control over any assets I might have or acquire in the future. My refusal to sign sent David into a panic. He actually begged me to reconsider, claiming his career depended on it. When I threatened to record our conversation, he left quickly but not before warning me that my parents had other plans if this approach didn't work. The threat was vague but chilling in its implications. I realized they weren't just trying to steal from me anymore, they were trying to completely erase my legal autonomy. That evening, I received formal notice that my parents had filed a restraining order against me. The court documents painted a disturbing picture of a daughter who had become increasingly unstable, making threats against her elderly parents after being denied money from her grandmother's estate. They included fabricated text messages showing me supposedly threatening violence and planning to harm them. The technical manipulation was sophisticated, using spoofed numbers and timestamps that looked legitimate to anyone not examining the metadata closely. The restraining order was devastating in its scope. I was banned from all family properties, forbidden from attending family events, and prohibited from contacting any family members who might support me. It also meant I couldn't access grandmother's houses to look for additional evidence she might have hidden. My parents had effectively excommunicated me from the Thompson family while simultaneously building a legal case that I was the dangerous one who needed to be stopped. The business community in New York is smaller than people realize, and news of the restraining order spread quickly through professional networks. Companies that had been interested in hiring me suddenly went silent. Recruiters stopped returning calls. My professional reputation, built over years of hard work, crumbled in weeks. I found myself unemployable in the city where I had built my entire career, painted as someone too unstable and litigious to risk hiring. With my savings depleted from the failed business investment, my career in ruins, and my support network systematically destroyed, I felt the walls closing in. But grandmother's evidence gave me something my parents hadn't counted on, proof of their crimes and the determination to fight back. I knew the next phase would be the hardest yet, but I refused to let them bury me like they had done to so many other family members before me. 2 weeks before my 29th birthday, my phone rang with a call from my mother. Her voice was different, shaky, and tear-filled in a way that seemed genuinely emotional rather than her usual calculated performances. She told me my father had experienced a mild heart episode and that the doctors said stress was killing him. She claimed he had been consumed with guilt about our family situation and desperately wanted to reconcile before something worse happened. The timing felt suspicious, but the mother in her voice triggered something primal in me despite everything they had done. She said my father had been having nightmares about dying with our relationship destroyed and that his last wish was to celebrate my birthday as a family again. When I hesitated, she broke down completely, begging me to consider one dinner, just one chance to make things right before it was too late. Ryan sent a handwritten letter to my hotel, the first handwritten anything I had received from him in years. He wrote eloquently about his journey in recovery, how seeing our family torn apart had been his rock bottom. He claimed to have been working with a therapist who helped him understand how he had contributed to the toxic dynamics. The letter was filled with specific memories from our childhood when we had been close, before money and favoritism poisoned everything. He asked for nothing except a chance to apologize in person. Against every instinct and Emma's strong objections, I agreed to a birthday dinner. The olive branch felt too significant to ignore completely, especially with my father's health in question. We negotiated neutral ground at Lou Bernardine, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants where public decorum would prevent any dramatic scenes. My parents insisted on booking their private dining room, claiming they wanted an intimate family moment without public scrutiny. I arrived with Emma as my support system, despite my parents' protests about including outsiders in our family reconciliation. The private dining room was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The table was set for 20 people, which immediately raised red flags. My mother, dressed in an elegant black dress, rushed to embrace me while my father, looking admittedly pale, remained seated but smiled warmly. The first surprise was seeing several of my former colleagues from work seated around the table. My parents explained they had invited people important to me to witness our family reconciliation and help restore my professional reputation. There were also family members I hadn't seen since that disastrous dinner months ago, all smiling and acting as if nothing had happened. The setup felt orchestrated, but I couldn't pinpoint the angle yet. Dinner began with seemingly normal conversation. My father gave a touching speech about the mistakes parents made trying to protect their children and how his recent health scare had shown him what truly mattered. My mother dabbed at her eyes as she talked about losing her way after grandmother's death and letting grief cloud her judgment. Even Ryan seemed genuinely emotional as he spoke about wanting his sister back in his life. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope this might be real. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. My parents had clearly spared no expense, and the wine flowed freely. I noticed Ryan wasn't drinking, which seemed to support his sobriety claims. Colleagues chatted about industry news and expressed support for my eventual return to marketing. The atmosphere felt almost dreamlike in its normalcy, as if the past 6 months had been some terrible nightmare. As dessert was being served, my father stood up, tapping his glass for attention. He began another speech about family, legacy, and the importance of truth. My heart raced as he mentioned grandmother and her final wishes. For a wild moment, I thought they might actually be about to admit their deception and make amends. Instead, Ryan suddenly stood up beside him, his face transforming from calm to anguished. What happened next was theater of the cruelest kind. Ryan began crying, not the fake tears I had seen before but full-body sobs that seemed to come from his soul. He pointed at me and accused me of stealing from grandmother's estate while she was dying. He claimed to have discovered evidence that I had been transferring money from her accounts for months, taking advantage of her dementia to fund my lifestyle. The room gasped as he produced documents showing transfers to accounts supposedly in my name. My father's expression turned from warm to stone cold as he announced they had no choice but to protect grandmother's legacy from my greed. He pulled out a thick envelope and slammed it on the table, declaring they were suing me for $500,000 in stolen funds plus damages. The other family members shook their heads in disgust while my former colleagues looked at me with horror and disappointment. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Before I could even process what was happening, my mother stood up, her face contorted with rage I had never seen before. She grabbed her wine glass and threw its contents directly in my face, screaming about how I had disgraced the family name. The red wine burned my eyes and stained my dress as my father swept his arm across the table, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor. The noise was deafening in the private room as other guests scrambled back from the destruction. Security appeared within seconds, clearly prearranged, and grabbed my arms to escort me out. Emma tried to intervene but was held back by other staff. As I was dragged through the restaurant, wine still dripping from my face, I saw other diners staring in shock and pulling out phones to record. My parents had orchestrated my complete humiliation in the most public way possible, ensuring the story would spread throughout New York's business community by morning. The final twist came as security deposited me on the sidewalk outside. Ryan appeared moments later, his tears miraculously dried, and handed me another envelope. Inside were photos taken of me over the past weeks by a private investigator, documenting my every move. The message was clear: they were watching, they were in control, and this was just the beginning if I didn't capitulate to their demands. He walked back inside without a word, leaving me standing on the street in my ruined dress. Emma found me 20 minutes later, still standing in shock outside the restaurant. She had managed to retrieve my coat and purse while using her legal credentials to obtain security footage of the entire incident. The restaurant manager, Pierre, discreetly provided her with a USB drive containing the private room's camera recordings, whispering that he had seen too many family ambushes in his establishment to let this one go undocumented. His small act of kindness in that moment of devastation gave me hope that not everyone could be bought or intimidated by my parents. The morning after my birthday disaster, I woke up to find my humiliation had gone viral. Videos of me being dragged out of Lou Bernardine covered in wine were all over social media with headlines like Heiress meltdown at five-star restaurant and Family Feud turns violent at exclusive venue. My parents had successfully painted me as the unhinged daughter who had disrupted a peaceful family dinner. But sometimes, public spectacle attracts unexpected attention. Harrison, my grandmother's real attorney, finally managed to reach me directly. He had been watching my parents' escalating attacks with growing concern and decided it was time to take decisive action. He introduced me to Chen Liu, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial crimes within families. She had been following my parents' money trails for years as part of a larger investigation into real estate money laundering. My case had just given her the opening she needed. Over coffee in a nondescript office building, Chen showed me evidence that made grandmother's discoveries look like the tip of the iceberg. My parents had been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise for over 2 decades, using family members as unwitting pawns in tax evasion and money laundering schemes. The fake business proposal they had presented to me was actually part of a larger fraud involving non-existent developments and investor money being funneled offshore. The restaurant manager, Pierre, reached out through Emma with more than just security footage. He revealed that my parents had been regular clients for years, often using his private dining rooms for what he now recognized as ambush meetings. He had documentation of at least 7 similar incidents over the past decade, always following the same pattern: reconciliation dinner, public humiliation, legal threats. His testimony would prove a pattern of behavior that would be crucial in court. More allies emerged from unexpected places. 3 former employees of my parents' real estate empire contacted Harrison after seeing the viral videos. They recognized the pattern and wanted to share their stories. There was Maria, a former accountant who had been fired after questioning suspicious transactions. James, a property manager who had been blacklisted after refusing to participate in tenant intimidation schemes. And Dmitry, a former driver who had overheard and documented years of incriminating conversations. Each ally brought pieces of a larger puzzle. Maria had copied files before her termination showing systematic tax fraud across dozens of properties. James had recordings of my parents instructing him to force out rent-controlled tenants through illegal means. Dmitry had dates, times, and locations of meetings with known criminals and corrupt officials. Together, their evidence painted a picture of an enterprise that would interest federal prosecutors. The breakthrough came from someone I hadn't even considered an ally. Thomas, the uncle who had lost everything to my parents a decade ago, had been planning his own revenge for years. Emma connected us, and I met a man who looked defeated but whose eyes burned with determination. He had spent 10 years documenting every person my parents had wronged, building a network of victims who were waiting for the right moment to strike back. Thomas revealed that 7 other family members had suffered similar fates, each losing businesses or inheritances through my parents' manipulations. He had kept in contact with all of them, creating a support group of sorts for survivors of William and Dorothy Thompson. They called themselves the Disinherited, and they had been pooling resources and evidence for years, waiting for someone still in the fight to champion their cause. Building our case required careful coordination. Chen worked on tracking the financial crimes while Harrison prepared the civil lawsuits. Emma used her legal connections to find sympathetic prosecutors who wouldn't be influenced by my parents' wealth and connections. Pierre provided his restaurant as a meeting place, using his private rooms for strategy sessions. Even Monica, my former friend, eventually came forward with evidence after my parents cut off her payments once she had served her purpose. The 4th attack came as we were building momentum. My parents, sensing the walls closing in, hired more aggressive intimidators. I was followed constantly by men in dark sedans. My hotel room was broken into twice, though I had learned to keep all evidence in multiple secure locations. They tried to hack my email and phone, forcing me to communicate through burner phones and encrypted messages. The psychological warfare was exhausting. One evening, while walking to meet Emma at a secure location, I was cornered in a parking garage by 2 men who made it clear they were there to deliver a message. They didn't touch me but described in detail what could happen if I didn't drop my investigations. When I tried to record them, they knocked my phone away and crushed it. I managed to activate my car alarm, causing enough commotion for them to flee, but the message was clear: my parents were escalating to physical intimidation. Emma's husband Marcus, a former Navy SEAL turned security consultant, became my unofficial bodyguard after the parking garage incident. He was built like a linebacker but moved with surprising grace, always positioning himself between me and potential threats. His presence was reassuring, but the fact that I needed protection from my own parents illustrated how far they were willing to go to protect their empire. The fifth attack was their most desperate yet. Unable to intimidate me directly, they went after my remaining support system. Emma received threats at her law firm. Chen's office was burglarized. Pierre found his restaurant suddenly facing multiple health code violations from inspectors who couldn't explain why they were there. Even Marcus had his security licenses challenged by anonymous complaints. My parents were using every connection and resource to isolate me completely. The turning point came when they overreached. In their desperation to destroy evidence, they attempted to burn down the storage facility where I kept physical documents. However, they didn't know I had moved everything days earlier based on Marcus's security recommendations. The arson attempt was caught on multiple cameras, and the hired arsonist was arrested at the scene. When faced with serious jail time, he immediately gave up who had hired him, providing the direct link to my parents that law enforcement needed. With evidence of attempted arson adding to our arsenal, Harrison felt we had enough to go on offense. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit that included fraud, elder abuse, racketeering, and conspiracy charges. The civil filing was strategically timed with Chen delivering her forensic findings to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The multi-pronged approach meant my parents would be fighting on several fronts simultaneously, diluting their resources and attention. My marketing background proved invaluable in the court of public opinion. I created a website called The Thompson Family Truth where I documented everything with receipts, recordings, and testimonies. The site went viral within the financial and legal communities, especially after I included the security footage from Lou Bernardine showing the premeditated nature of my birthday humiliation. The narrative shifted from unstable daughter to brave whistleblower exposing family corruption. The website became a gathering place for other victims to share their stories. Within days, dozens of people came forward with their own experiences of being cheated by my parents in business deals. Former tenants described illegal evictions. Business partners detailed fraudulent contracts. City officials, speaking anonymously, confirmed years of suspected bribery and corruption. The avalanche of testimonies made it impossible for my parents to maintain their respectable facade. The real bombshell came from an unexpected source, Sophia Martinez, Ryan's girlfriend whom everyone had dismissed as just another party girl he was dating. She contacted me through the website with a story that changed everything. Sophia was actually a law student who had been documenting Ryan's activities for months after discovering he was still dealing drugs while pretending to be in recovery. She had originally planned to use the evidence to protect herself when their relationship inevitably ended. Sophia revealed that Ryan had never been to rehab. The entire recovery story was a fabrication designed to manipulate me. He had been actively involved in planning every attack against me, often providing the inside information about my movements and vulnerabilities. She had recordings of Ryan bragging about how they were going to destroy me and split my inheritance. Most damaging was a video of him practicing his tearful performance for the restaurant ambush, laughing about how gullible I was. The pregnancy test in her hand as she showed me the evidence added another dimension to her motivation. Sophia wanted out before her child was born into this toxic family. She had access to Ryan's devices and had downloaded years of incriminating communications between him and our parents. The messages detailed not just their plans against me but numerous other crimes including drug trafficking through their real estate holdings and bribing judges in their civil cases. We coordinated Sophia's revelations with our legal filing, ensuring maximum impact. Harrison arranged for her to be placed in protective custody given the sensitive nature of her evidence. Her testimony would be crucial, but we needed to keep her safe from my family's reach. The FBI took particular interest in the judicial bribery evidence, launching a separate investigation that would eventually ensnare 3 judges and numerous court officials. My parents' response was predictably aggressive but increasingly sloppy. They hired the most expensive law firm in Manhattan and launched countersuits claiming defamation and extortion. They attempted to discredit every witness against them, but their usual tactics of financial pressure and intimidation were less effective under federal scrutiny. Their lawyer, a sharp woman named Victoria Pemberton, was formidable, but even she seemed uncomfortable with some of their requested strategies. The mistake that accelerated their downfall was attempting to bribe Judge Harrison Chen, who was overseeing our civil case. They didn't know the FBI had already warned him about their history of judicial corruption and had set up surveillance. The attempted bribe was caught on video and audio, with my mother explicitly offering $1 million for a favorable ruling. The judge played along just long enough to gather undeniable evidence before reporting it to federal authorities. With a federal judge now personally invested in seeing justice done, the investigations accelerated rapidly. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. The IRS launched a comprehensive audit going back 20 years. My parents' empire, built on decades of crime and corruption, began collapsing with stunning speed. Their society friends distanced themselves. Business partners fled. Even their country club revoked their membership. The stress finally caught up with my father in a real way. He suffered an actual heart attack during a deposition, collapsing dramatically while being questioned about offshore accounts. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that his earlier fake health scare had become reality. He survived but required emergency surgery and extended hospitalization. My mother's careful composure cracked as she was forced to deal with mounting legal pressure while managing his medical care. The media storm intensified as more details emerged. Financial journalists who had once celebrated my parents' business acumen now competed to expose their crimes. Documentary filmmakers reached out about telling the story. True crime podcasts dissected each new revelation. The Thompson name became synonymous with family betrayal and white-collar crime. My parents' carefully cultivated reputation was destroyed beyond repair. The final blow to their defense came when their own lawyer withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. The rumor was that they had asked her to do something so unethical that even she, with her reputation for ruthless tactics, couldn't comply. They struggled to find replacement counsel as word spread through the legal community about their tactics and the strength of the case against them. The consolidated hearing for all related cases was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the federal courthouse for the Southern District of New York. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, victims, and curious observers who had followed the saga through social media. I sat with Harrison and Emma at the plaintiff's table, finally feeling like we had a real chance at justice after months of fighting. My parents entered looking diminished. My father, still recovering from his heart attack, was in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. My mother had abandoned her usual designer suits for a modest black dress, attempting to appear sympathetic. Ryan was notably absent, having been arrested separately on drug charges after Sophia's evidence led to a DEA raid on his apartment where they found significant quantities of cocaine and evidence of distribution. The proceedings began with the prosecution laying out the scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. 23 offshore accounts, 42 instances of tax evasion, 16 cases of elder financial abuse, and over $100 million in laundered money. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Jennifer Walsh, methodically presented each crime with supporting documentation that my parents' remaining lawyers couldn't refute. When it came time for witness testimony, the parade of victims was heartbreaking. Uncle Thomas testified about losing his tech company and spending years in poverty. Maria described being blacklisted from the accounting industry after questioning my parents' books. Elderly tenants told of being forced from their homes through illegal tactics. Each story added another layer to the pattern of cruelty and greed that had defined my parents' business practices for decades. Sophia's testimony via secure video link was the most dramatic moment. 9 months pregnant and in protective custody, she calmly presented recordings and documents that proved Ryan and my parents had conspired in every attack against me. She played the video of Ryan rehearsing his restaurant performance, his laughter echoing through the silent courtroom. My mother actually flinched when she heard her own voice on a recording discussing how to permanently deal with me if I didn't comply. The most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. The prosecutor announced a surprise witness, and I gasped as a young woman entered the courtroom. She introduced herself as Amber Chen, 25 years old, my half-sister from my father's affair with his secretary 2 decades ago. My mother's face went white as Amber explained how my father had been paying her mother for silence while simultaneously threatening to destroy them if they ever went public. Amber had spent years collecting evidence of my father's hidden life, including a second family he had partially supported while portraying himself as a devoted husband. She had recordings of him discussing his plans to eventually divorce my mother and cut all his children out of the will once he had consolidated complete control of the family assets. The betrayal went deeper than anyone had imagined, with my father planning to discard his entire family once we had served our purpose. The courtroom erupted when Amber presented documents showing my father had been systematically hiding assets from my mother as well. The supposed partnership between my parents was another lie, with my father preparing to leave my mother penniless despite her equal participation in their crimes. My mother's composure finally shattered completely as she realized she had been played just like the rest of us. She turned to my father with a look of such venomous hatred that security stepped closer to their table. Ryan finally appeared via video link from federal detention, but not as a witness for our parents. In a stunning turn, he had agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the full scope of the drug operation run through my parents' properties, implicating numerous city officials and police officers who had been paid to look the other way. He seemed almost relieved to finally tell the truth, admitting he had been trapped in the family criminal enterprise since his teens. The judge, Harrison Chen, maintained strict order as shocking revelation followed shocking revelation. When my parents' latest lawyer attempted to object to the mounting evidence, the judge reminded him of the attempted bribery and suggested he focus on damage control rather than denial. The lawyer, clearly realizing the hopelessness of the situation, began negotiating for plea deals rather than mounting a defense. My grandmother's final message was presented last. Harrison had saved it for maximum impact, a video recording she had made just months before her death. On the screen, my grandmother looked frail but determined as she detailed decades of abuse by my parents. She described their theft, their manipulation, and their cruelty with receipts for everything. Her final words were addressed to me, "Jessica, my dear, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. But I knew you would be strong enough to fight them. Use what I've left you to help others they've hurt. Break the cycle." By the end of the day, the outcome was clear. My parents were facing dozens of federal charges each with cumulative sentences that would ensure they died in prison. Their assets would be seized and distributed among their victims. Ryan would serve 5 to 7 years but would at least have a chance at redemption. The empire built on lies, theft, and betrayal had completely crumbled in a single day of testimony. The media coverage was extensive and brutal. Headlines screamed about the family fraud of the century and the Manhattan money launderers. My parents' mugshots became synonymous with family betrayal. The society pages that had once celebrated their charity galas now documented their spectacular fall from grace. Former friends and associates rushed to distance themselves and share stories of suspected wrongdoing they had previously ignored. The legal victories came in rapid succession after that dramatic day in court. The civil case awarded me not just my rightful inheritance but significant damages for the deliberate infliction of emotional distress and the destruction of my career. The other victims received similar settlements, with Uncle Thomas finally getting compensation for his stolen company. The federal criminal case moved swiftly, with my parents ultimately sentenced to 25 years each after their guilty pleas. Recovering the hidden assets took months of international legal work, but Chen's expertise proved invaluable. We traced money through shell companies in 12 countries, eventually recovering over $200 million in stolen funds. The government seized additional millions in domestic assets. The distribution process was complex but fair, ensuring every victim received compensation proportionate to their losses. I struggled initially with what to do with my inheritance and settlement money. The wealth felt tainted by its origins, even though it was rightfully mine. After much consideration, I established the Catherine Thompson Foundation for Family Fraud Victims, named after my grandmother. The foundation provides legal resources, counseling, and financial support to people facing similar situations of family financial abuse. It felt like the perfect way to honor grandmother's memory while helping others escape the trap my family had set. Returning to marketing wasn't immediately possible given the public nature of my story. Instead, I pivoted to consulting specifically for family businesses on establishing ethical governance structures and protecting against internal fraud. My unique experience, while painful, gave me insights that proved valuable to other families wanting to avoid similar disasters. Within a year, I had built a thriving practice with clients across the country seeking to prevent the kind of destruction my family had experienced. The personal healing took longer than the legal victories. I started therapy to process the deep betrayal trauma, working through issues of trust and family that would likely take years to fully resolve. Learning to distinguish between family of blood and family of choice became a central theme in my recovery. The therapist specialized in complex family trauma and helped me understand that my parents' treatment of me had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with their own moral bankruptcy. Slowly, I built a new support system. Emma became more than a cousin, she became the sister I had always wanted. Marcus and his military friends provided an unexpected brotherhood of protectors who helped me feel safe as I rebuilt. Even Pierre from the restaurant became a friend, inviting me to family dinners where I experienced what healthy family dynamics actually looked like. These chosen family members showed me that love doesn't require blood relations. The surprise was reconnecting with Amber, my half-sister. After the initial shock wore off, we discovered we had much in common beyond our shared father. Both of us had been victims of his manipulation in different ways. We began meeting for coffee, then dinner, eventually developing a genuine sisterly bond. Her mother, freed from years of threats and silence, welcomed me warmly. It was strange but healing to find real family in the wreckage of the false one. Ryan's journey was complicated. From federal prison, he wrote letters attempting to explain and apologize. I didn't respond for months, the betrayal too fresh and deep. Eventually, through therapy and time, I agreed to one visit. The man I found was genuinely broken, finally forced to confront who he had become. He was attending real therapy, getting actual treatment for addiction, and seemed committed to change. I couldn't forgive him yet, but I left the door open for future possibilities of reconciliation. A year after the trial, I attended a support group for family fraud victims that had formed around the foundation. Listening to their stories, I realized how common these situations were and how little resources existed for victims. The shame and isolation many felt resonated deeply with my own experience. I began speaking publicly about family financial abuse, working to remove the stigma and encourage others to seek help before situations escalated to criminal levels. The unexpected joy came through Thomas Wilson, another family fraud survivor I met at a foundation event. He had lost his family's manufacturing business to a similar scheme orchestrated by his siblings. We bonded over our shared experiences of betrayal and the challenge of rebuilding both financially and emotionally. What started as comparing notes over coffee evolved into a deep friendship and eventually something more. It felt healing to build a relationship with someone who truly understood the unique trauma we had both experienced. My 30th birthday was deliberately low-key, the opposite of the catastrophic 29th. Emma hosted a small gathering at her home with our chosen family. There was no grand restaurant, no elaborate speeches, just genuine people who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. Pierre brought a simple but perfect cake. Marcus told embarrassing stories about our security adventures. Amber gave me a photo album she had created of grandmother's life, filled with pictures I had never seen. That evening, I visited grandmother's grave for the first time since winning the legal battles. I brought her favorite flowers and sat on the grass beside her headstone, updating her on everything that had happened. I told her about the foundation, about the people we were helping, about finding Amber and slowly healing from the wounds her son and daughter-in-law had inflicted. I promised to use her gift wisely, to help others escape the trap of family fraud, and to never let wealth corrupt my values as it had corrupted my parents. The sunset was particularly beautiful that day, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As I prepared to leave, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The family that had tried to destroy me was gone, locked away and powerless. But in their place, I had built something better. A chosen family based on trust and mutual respect, a career helping others, and most importantly, freedom from the toxic cycles that had defined the Thompson family for generations. Sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing their true colors. Because only then can you break free and find the people who deserve your love. My parents thought they were destroying me that night at Lou Bernardine when they threw wine in my face and handed me that lawsuit. Instead, they set me free. Free to build a life based on truth rather than manipulation, love rather than control, and genuine connection rather than blood obligation. And that freedom, more than any amount of money, was the real inheritance I needed. What started as the worst birthday of my life became the catalyst for discovering who I really was and what I was capable of surviving. They say living well is the best revenge, but I've learned that living authentically is even better. Every day I wake up knowing I faced down the people who were supposed to love me most and survived their worst. That knowledge makes every other challenge seem manageable in comparison. To anyone watching who's dealing with family members who seem determined to destroy rather than support you, know that you're not alone. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Don't let guilt or false hope keep you in harmful situations. And remember, the family you choose can be more real and loving than the one you were born into. Sometimes cutting toxic family ties isn't giving up, it's giving yourself the chance to grow into who you were meant to be. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If my story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family struggles, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation? Please like this video if you believe in standing up to family bullies, and subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy for suspecting their family is working against them. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how your family treats you but by how you choose to treat yourself and others despite that treatment. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never let anyone, especially family, convince you that their love comes with conditions that destroy your soul.